All right, you sick fucks, strap in. Today, we're diving headfirst into some seriously fucked up shit. Narcoculture in Mexico. You think you know cartels from movies and shows,
Yeah.
but let's cut the crap and get to the nitty-gritty. We've got a badass expert here who's going to break it all down.
Yeah.
From those ridiculous narco juniors to the whole Santa Muerte worshiping thing. Get ready to have your mind blown, because this shit is wild.
It really is. Narcoculture is a lot more pervasive than people realize. It's not just about the cartels themselves. It's woven into the fabric of everyday life in Mexico, especially for young people. We're talking values, lifestyle, even fashion choices.
Fashion choices.
That become normalized in regions under cartel control.
Seriously, what are we talking here? Cartel-branded wife beaters?
And not.
And bedazzled AK-47s.
But the sources mention high-end brands like Gucci and Balenciaga. These guys want to project an image of wealth and power to aspire to a certain lifestyle, even if it's built on a foundation of blood and drugs.
Gucci for narcos. That's fucked up, man. But I guess it makes sense. They're all about image, right?
Exactly.
Even if their business is, chopping people up and dissolving them in acid.
It's a twisted sense of aspiration and status, a need to show off their ill-gotten gains. What's fascinating is the psychology behind it. These guys are seeking validation just like anyone else who buys into designer labels.
Right.
It's just their means of acquiring wealth are a bit more extreme.
Yeah, so how did this whole narcoculture thing even start? Did some pissed off farmer just wake up one day and say, fuck it, I'm growing weed? And it all spiraled from there?
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. Surprisingly, it has humble origins, tracing back to Chinese immigrants who brought poppy seeds to Sinaloa.
Really?
When they came to work on the railroads and mines in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Wait, Chinese immigrants are responsible for Mexican cartels? Now that's a plot twist I didn't see coming.
It's not that straightforward. U.S. prohibition in the early 20th century played a huge role. The demand for booze north of the border went through the roof, and Mexican producers stepped in to fill the void.
Right.
Over time, this illicit trade grew, became more organized, and eventually morphed into the cartels we know today.
Okay, so we've got Chinese immigrants, American prohibition, and a bunch of opportunistic Mexicans looking to make a quick buck. Sounds like the perfect recipe for a shitstorm.
Yeah.
But when did this whole narco thing become a culture, something people actually aspire to be a part of?
It was a gradual shift in Mexican society's acceptance of the drug trade. As the cartels amassed power and wealth, their influence grew.
Right.
Their values, their lifestyle seeped into the mainstream, particularly in areas with limited economic opportunities.
Speaking of cartels and power, what about this El Chapo guy? Is he seriously considered a folk hero down there? I mean, the dude was breaking out of prisons and making the Mexican government look like a bunch of clowns.
El Chapo's story perfectly illustrates how narcoculture romanticizes these figures. There's a whole genre of music called narco corridos, basically ballads about drug lords that portray guys like El Chapo as Robin Hood-esque figures.
Oh, wow.
Fighting against the system and redistributing wealth.
So basically gangsta rap, but with sombreros and accordions instead of gold chains and lowriders.
You could say that. They glorify the outlaw lifestyle, the violence, obscene wealth. It resonates with people, especially young men, who see no other way out of poverty.
Right.
They buy into the myth that these cartel bosses are powerful, rebellious figures who take what they want.
That's pretty fucked up, man.
Yeah.
But I get it. Everyone loves a good outlaw story. But these guys aren't exactly stealing from the rich to give to the poor, are they?
Absolutely.
They're more like greedy bastards who terrorize communities and get rich off addiction and suffering.
There's a huge disconnect between the romanticized image and the reality of cartel operations. They leave a trail of destruction and misery in their wake.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that part doesn't get much airtime in those narco corridos.
Oh, all right. So we've covered the history, the music, the twisted Robin Hood narrative. But what about these narco juniors everyone's talking about?
Yeah.
They sound like a bunch of spoiled prats playing gangster with daddy's money.
In a way, they are. They represent a shift in narcoculture, a new generation of cartel members. These are the children of the first generation of drug lords, raised in a world of obscene wealth and casual violence.
So they're like the Paris Hiltons of the cartel world. Except instead of Chihuahua purses, they're rocking gold-plated AK-47s and pet tigers.
Something like that. They're less about loyalty and roots, and more about flaunting their wealth and power. They're all over social media, posting pictures of their cars, guns, and lavish lifestyle.
Wait, seriously, narcos on Instagram. What the hell are their handles? Asking for a friend, of course.
It's a real problem. They use social media for everything from propaganda and recruitment to tracking their rivals.
Oh, wow.
And it plays right into their need for validation. They want to be feared,
right,
but they also crave online fame and instant gratification.
It's pretty ironic, don't you think?
It's fucking insane. These guys are ruthless killers, and they're worried about getting likes and followers on Instagram. What a bunch of insecure assholes.
It's a reflection of how social media impacts everyone, for better or worse.
Yeah.
We all seek validation,
right,
connection, a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that for these narco juniors, the stakes are a hell of a lot higher, and the consequences are far more dire.
You know what? You're right. It makes you wonder how much of our own culture is just bullshit we accept because it's all we know.
Right.
But hey, that's a deep dive for another day.
Right.
Right now, let's talk about this whole narco-religion thing.
Okay.
This shit sounds like something straight out of a Tarantino movie.
It's a fascinating and somewhat disturbing blend of Catholicism and folk beliefs.
Really?
One prominent figure is Santa Muerte, a skeletal saint of death.
Hold up, they pray to a fucking skeleton for protection. That's some next-level dark shit, man. It might seem contradictory, but Santa Muerte is seen as a powerful figure who can grant favors and offer protection, even from death itself.
So it's like saying, fuck you to the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
I've got my own skeletal buddy watching my back, bitch.
In a way, yes. It's a complex belief system rooted in indigenous traditions and Catholic iconography.
Right.
It reflects a deep-seated need for spiritual guidance and protection in a world where violence and death are constant threats.
Okay, so we've got narco saints, narco music, narco fashion.
Yeah.
What's next? Narco Netflix. Do these guys have their own streaming service filled with cartel-produced content?
Well, not a streaming service, but narco cinema is a whole genre of films and TV shows that depict the drug trade, often blurring the lines between fiction and reality.
Oh, yeah, I've seen a few of those.
Yeah.
They can be pretty brutal. Remember that movie Healy? That scene where they... Jesus, man, I still can't get that image out of my head.
Healy is a good example of how narco cinema can be both realistic and exploitative. It shows the brutality of the cartels, but it also risks glamorizing the violence and desensitizing viewers to the human cost.
There's another movie, Ms. Bala, right?
Yeah.
About a beauty queen who gets caught up in the cartel world.
Yeah.
Is one of these movies more honest than the other?
That's a good question. Miss Bala focuses on the human cost of the drug war, the way innocent people get caught in the crossfire. Healy is more about the visceral violence, the dark underbelly of the cartel world. Both films offer a glimpse into this world, but they approach it from different angles, showing different facets of a complex reality.
So it's like two sides of the same fucked up coin.
Right.
One is more about the tragedy, the other is more about the horror.
Yeah.
Either way, it's not exactly a feel-good movie night.
Definitely not. But these films reflect a reality that many people in Mexico live with every single day.
Right.
They're a reminder of the power of the cartels and the grip they have on society.
And speaking of power, let's circle back to those Instagram narcos. Didn't some cartel dude get busted because of his flashy posts? You know, all those pictures of him chilling with tigers and stacks of cash?
Yes, there's the case of El Chino Antrax.
Oh, really?
A high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel. He flaunted his lavish lifestyle on social media, posting pictures of his cars, guns, and travels. It ultimately helped authorities track him down and arrest him.
So in the end, his need for internet clout landed his ass in jail. That's some poetic justice right there.
It's a perfect example of the hypocrisy and delusion that lie at the heart of narcoculture. They want to be feared and admired, but their thirst for fame and validation can be their undoing.
It's like they say, live by the gram, die by the gram. Except in this case, it's not just about Instagram likes. It's about life and death.
Exactly. Social media has become a powerful tool for the cartels, but it's also a double-edged sword. It gives them a platform to spread their propaganda and intimidate rivals. But it also exposes their vulnerabilities and can lead to their downfall. Yeah. It's fascinating how these guys crave attention, needing to show off their wealth and power, as if it somehow legitimizes their brutal activities.
It's like they think they're rock stars, but instead of selling out stadiums, they're pushing kilos of coke. And instead of adoring fans, they got a bunch of trigger-happy goons ready to waste anyone who looks at them funny.
Exactly. It's a bizarre cocktail of bravado and insecurity. They project this image of invincibility while simultaneously craving validation and recognition, as if the world needs to acknowledge their twisted success.
You know, it's funny. These guys are supposedly all about tradition, family, honor, all that bullshit. But the way these narco juniors are acting, it seems like they've thrown all that out the window. It's all about bling, bitches, and blow, with a healthy dose of Instagram likes for good measure.
It's a clear generational shift. The older narcos, the ones who built these empires, they came from poverty. They clawed their way up through sheer ruthlessness and a warped sense of loyalty. They had a code, a set of values. Even if those values were twisted and brutal, but these younger guys, they've grown up with everything handed to them on a silver platter. They're entitled, reckless, and arguably more dangerous because of it.
So they're basically the trust fund kids of the cartel world. Except instead of blowing their inheritance on yachts and champagne, they're buying gold-plated AK-47s and keeping tiger cubs as pets.
That's a pretty accurate analogy. They have zero respect for the old ways. They're impulsive, and they're constantly pushing boundaries, which has created a much more volatile and unpredictable landscape in the drug trade.
Well, that's just fucking fantastic. So not only are these cartels brutal and ruthless, but now we've got a bunch of hopped-up rich kids running around with more money and firepower than they know what to do with. What could possibly go wrong,
Well, it's a recipe for disaster, honestly. The old rules are crumbling and nobody knows what's going to replace them. It's a dangerous and uncertain time in Mexico, especially for those caught in the crosshairs of this evolving narco landscape.
This whole narcoculture thing, it's like a cancer, man. It starts small, then it spreads. And before you know it, it's infected every part of society. The music, the movies, the fashion, even the damn religion.
It's a pervasive influence, and it's hard to escape, especially when it's become so intertwined with Mexican culture that it's almost impossible to separate the two. It's a toxic symbiosis that feeds on itself.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the players, the evolution of this whole narco thing. But what about the impact on everyday people living in Mexico? I mean, besides the obvious risk of getting caught in a shootout or ending up in a cartel-funded mass grave.
It's a complicated issue. For some, the cartels offer a perverse path to wealth and power, a way out of grinding poverty. They provide jobs, they invest in communities, they even offer a twisted sense of protection.
Hold on, protection? You mean protection from the very cartel that's terrorizing the community in the first place? That's some next-level fucked-up logic right there. Like paying the mafia for protection money.
It's a twisted reality. But it's the reality many people face. The government is often corrupt or ineffective, leaving people with few options. They turn to the cartels for what they can't get elsewhere. It's a Faustian bargain, but for some, it's the only choice they have. Survival trumps morality when you're desperate.
Man, that's depressing. So it's a lose-lose situation. Either you get screwed over by the government or you get screwed over by the cartels. What a fucking choice.
It's a dire situation, and there are no easy answers. But it's important to remember that there are many people in Mexico fighting against this narcoculture, working to create a better future for themselves and their families. They're the unsung heroes in this whole mess.
Yeah, those folks are the real badasses, man. Risking their lives to stand up to these cartel bastards. I take my hat off to them. But it's got to be a tough battle, right? The cartels have so much money, so much power, it's hard to imagine them ever losing their grip. It's like trying to fight a hydra. Cut off one head and two more grow back.
It's a long and difficult struggle, but there's always hope. The government is making some efforts to crack down on corruption. People are finding their voices and speaking out. And the cartels are facing increasing pressure from both inside and outside Mexico. It's a multi-pronged battle that requires sustained effort.
Okay, so maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it sounds like it's a pretty damn long tunnel.
It is, but every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. And every voice raised against narcoculture is a sign that things are starting to change, that people are refusing to accept this as their inevitable fate.
All right, well, that's slightly less depressing than I thought it was going to be. But this whole narcoculture thing, it's a real mindfuck, man. It's hard to grasp the scale of the violence, the corruption, the sheer insanity of it all. It's like something out of a dystopian nightmare.
It's a complex issue, and there's no single answer or solution. But by understanding the history, the culture, and the motivations behind it, we can start to have a more informed and nuanced conversation about how to address it. Knowledge is power, even when it's disturbing.
You know, you're right. It's easy to just dismiss these guys as a bunch of crazy criminals, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's a whole culture, a whole system that supports and sustains them. And until we address that, the problem's just going to keep festering and spreading.
Exactly. We need to look beyond the headlines, beyond the sensationalized stories, and try to understand the deeper forces at play. We need to ask ourselves why this is happening, what are the root causes, and how can we break the cycle?
Well, I gotta say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's made me realize just how much I didn't know about narcoculture. And frankly, it's pretty terrifying.
It's understandable to feel that way. It's a dark and complex subject, and it's easy to get overwhelmed by it all. It's like staring into the abyss, and sometimes the abyss stares back.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling overwhelmed. I think I need a stiff drink.
Yeah.
Maybe two. And possibly a therapist who specializes in cartel-induced existential dread.
I think that's a wise idea. It's important to take care of yourself, especially when grappling with such heavy and disturbing topics. You need to find healthy ways to process the darkness without letting it consume you.
You know what? I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to grab a six-pack fire up the dark web and find myself a therapist specializing in cartel-induced trauma. Then I'm going to watch some stupid rom-com to cleanse my palate and remind myself that there's still some good in the world.
That sounds like a solid plan. It's all about finding balance, right? You need to acknowledge the darkness without letting it extinguish your own inner light.
Right. All right, folks, that's it for part 2 of our deep dive into the twisted world of narcoculture. We'll be back in a flash to wrap things up with some final thoughts and maybe a few laughs, because God knows we all need a good laugh after this shit. All right, you sick fucks, we're back for the final round of this twisted journey into narcoculture. Did you refill your drinks? Good, because we still got some ground to cover. It's mind-blowing how this shit isn't just about drugs and violence. It's a whole fucked-up ecosystem that's infected parts of Mexican society.
It truly is a complex phenomenon. We've seen how it's mutated over time, shaped by history, economics, social media, and a whole lot of desperation.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the music, the movies, the whole narco saint worship thing. It's like they've got their own fucked-up version of Hollywood down there, churning out propaganda and glorifying these murderous thugs.
It's a reflection of the culture, the values, the realities people face in certain parts of Mexico. You could say it's a coping mechanism, a way of processing the trauma and making sense of the chaos.
But it also glamorizes the violence,
Yeah.
the brutality, the whole fuck you, I'm rich and powerful mentality.
Yeah.
It's like a feedback loop of fucked upness that just keeps spiraling out of control.
It's a dangerous cycle, and breaking free from it requires a monumental effort. But there are people out there, brave individuals and organizations who are actively working to challenge these narratives, to offer alternative paths to show that there's another way.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, the history, the impact on everyday people caught in the crossfire. But what the fuck can we actually do about it, besides moving to Canada and living off maple syrup and poutine, of course?
Well, relocating to a maple syrup haven is one option, but there are more proactive steps we can take. Supporting organizations working to combat drug trafficking and violence in Mexico is a good start. Educating ourselves and others about the realities of narcoculture, stripping away the romanticized bullshit and exposing the brutal truth is another. And we can't forget about holding our own governments accountable because, let's be real, the demand for drugs in the U.S. and other countries fuels this whole damn thing.
So it's not just a Mexican problem, it's a global problem. The insatiable appetite for drugs in wealthy nations creates the market that these cartels exploit. We're all complicit in a way, whether we like to admit it or not.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and pretend it's not our problem. We need to take responsibility for our role in this and work together to find solutions. It's about reducing demand, addressing the root causes of poverty and inequality that make people vulnerable to cartel recruitment, and putting pressure on governments to implement effective policies.
Damn, man, this is heavy shit. I'm starting to think we need more than just tequila to deal with this. Maybe a psychedelic journey to the Amazon, some ayahuasca with a shaman.
I'm not sure hallucinogenic plants are the answer here, but I appreciate the sentiment. We need to find ways to stay engaged with this issue without getting completely overwhelmed by the darkness. It's about finding that balance between awareness and action and not losing hope in the process.
Okay, so no ayahuasca. But maybe we can at least offer our listeners some practical steps, something they can actually do besides feeling depressed and drinking themselves into oblivion.
Absolutely. Here are a few things you can do to make a difference. First, educate yourself. Read articles, watch documentaries, dive deep into the history and the realities of the drug trade. Second, support organizations on the ground in Mexico that are fighting the good fight against violence, poverty, and addiction. They need resources, and they need our support. Third, hold your own government accountable. Contact your representatives and demand that they address the root causes of the drug trade both domestically and internationally. And finally, have conversations. Talk to your friends, family, and community about this issue. The more we talk about it, the more likely we are to find solutions.
Right, these are some solid steps. And if all else fails, there's always tequila and tacos. Because let's be real, sometimes you just gotta numb the pain with delicious food and strong drinks.
I wouldn't recommend that as a long-term solution, but I understand the appeal. We all need our coping mechanisms.
Well, folks, there you have it. Another deep dive into the dark underbelly of humanity. We've explored the twisted world of narcoculture, from its humble beginnings to its current state of chaos and excess. We've talked about the history, the players, the impact, and most importantly, what we can do to fight back against this epidemic.
It's been a heavy conversation, but it's an important one. We can't ignore these issues. We can't pretend they don't exist. Awareness is the first step towards change.
You know what, you're right. Ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power. And sometimes a little bit of knowledge can really fuck up your day.
That's the price of awareness. But it's also the catalyst for action. We can choose to be overwhelmed by the darkness, or we can choose to be a light in the darkness.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dives. We'll be back next week with another topic that will hopefully be a little less soul-crushing. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and try not to get caught in any cartel crossfire.
And remember, there's always hope. Even in the darkest of times, there are people fighting for a better future. Don't give up on them, and don't give up on yourselves.
Peace out, motherfuckers.